Hello everyone and welcome to this tutorial. So today I'm going to be showing you how you can pass an image from one page to another via local storage in a user's browser. Now, in case you've worked with local storage before, you might be wondering how this is possible since you can only store a string value inside local storage. So the way that you can do this is by first of all reading the file using JavaScript's native FileReader API and then creating, as a result of that reading, a data URL that contains the image encoded in string format, and finally to store that string value in local storage. So in terms of this example, I've already done a little bit of groundwork. So I created an input element in the HTML of type file. So we're going to be reading in a user selected file. I also created a button which, when clicked, will take you to nextpage.html in the same folder. So I've already added an event listener for that. So when you click on next page, you get to the next page. And for now, this is completely empty apart from this comment here. We're going to eventually be getting the image from local storage that we pass into local storage in index.html. So with this all in place already, I'm ready to start with the main bit of the coding. So the first thing I want to do is to read the user selected file using the file reader. So I'm going to add an event listener to this input element because I don't want the file reading to occur before the user has selected a file. So the event to listen out for on a file input element that will fire every time a user selects a file is the change event. And when that occurs, there will be a file inside the input element, so then I can start the reading. So to start a file reading, you need to create a new instance of the FileReader object. So that's a native object in JavaScript, and you don't need to pass anything into it. You just need to make sure you use the new operator before it and store it in a memorable variable name. Next, you need to decide how you're going to read the file and what file you're going to read. So in this instance, I want to create a data URL to the file. So for this, I call the read as data URL method on the new FileReader object that I've created. And passing in here, I want to pass in the file that the user has selected. So that will be available on the input element, and it's stored on an object called files, and it's stored there in an array. So because there's only one file, it's going to be in position 0. So that's all the code you need to start a file reading, but the reading of the data is actually asynchronous, so you have to wait for it. And the way that you do that is by adding an event listener to your FileReader object. So you're listening out for the load event, and when that occurs, so it will occur when the reading is fully complete, it will be available on the result property on your FileReader object. So I'm going to save the result as URL because it's going to be in that format. Okay, so let's take a look at this new URL that's been created in the console. So a data URL, for practical purposes, it functions just like a regular URL, but it looks quite different. So you can see that it's quite big, 75 kilobytes for a URL. That is very large. So you see that it doesn't look much like a normal URL at all. And this is because this URL, it doesn't point to an external resource. It is itself the resource. So the image is encoded as part of the URL. So what you have here is effectively the image stored in a string. Now, just to demonstrate that it does indeed function like a regular URL, what I'll do here instead of logging it to the console now is create a new image element, which I will call image, and I will set the src of that to be the URL that we just created, and then I'll append this new image element to the DOM. Okay, so now when I select a file, the image should appear on screen. And if we inspect the element in the DOM, you can see here that the src has been set to this very, very long URL we created with the file reader. Okay, so now that we have the image stored in a string URL, what we can do is to pass that URL into local storage. So you can do that by saying set item and this takes two arguments. The first one is a key, which I will give my image, and the second argument is a string value. So the URL is fine as a value to pass in. The only concern you might have is that for a particularly large image, it might exceed the local storage capacity of around 5 megabytes on most users' browsers. So in that case, it would be a better idea to send it to the server, but in most cases, an image is probably going to be under 5 megabytes. So I'll save this now because the URL has been saved to local storage. So on this page, I'm going to retrieve that value from the local storage, so the data URL, by using the getItem method and passing in the key for that entry. And then what I'm going to do is exactly the same thing as we did on the previous page. I'm going to create a new image element, and I'm going to set the src of this new element to the URL that we passed through local storage. And then, of course, I'm going to append it to the DOM so we can see if everything worked. Okay, so let's test this out now. I will select the image again. Now, there's no image being printed to the page here because I'm not creating a new image element on the first page. I'm just passing it in to local storage. But what I can do is to check whether that worked, see what is inside local storage in the console. So you see here that there's one entry, and it's the data URL that I passed in with the key of my image. So now when I click next page, the new image element is there. The data URL, which I set to the src, was successfully passed through local storage, and now it's on next page, even though the file reading took place on the previous page. So that's how you can go about passing an image through local storage. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. If you did, please consider hitting the like button down below this video because it helps with the algorithm, others to find the video. And if you'd like to see more content like this from us in the future, don't forget you can subscribe to the channel.